very honorable, and my students, faculty members, my peers, mentors, friends, brothers, sisters, and above all, very dear to me, my audience. First of all, I start the today's lecture with these prayers and best wishes that ربنا لا تحملنا ما لا طاقة لنا به واعف عنا واغفر لنا وارحمنا أنت مولانا فانصرنا للقوم الكافرين. I pray from the core of my heart that the entire humanity, the people from Pakistan, from Gilgit-Baltistan, your families and everybody around is saved from this deadly and lethal disease of COVID-19, which is unprecedented in the history of mankind. And I believe that you all are safe, your families are safe. And inshallah, with the blessings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we will move out of this crisis, this pandemic. In Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has said that on the earth, in the seas, some of the humans have made greater destruction. And then because of these actions, put them into different kinds of testimonies so that they can learn from it, and maybe some of them can come back to the right path. So all these events which we are facing as human beings around us are definitely one way or the other way dependent on the actions we have been doing for years and years, for centuries and centuries. In one of my articles, which I published in the local newspapers, and it was more about the economic impact of the COVID-19 and what the world is heading towards, God forbids, a greater economic recession we could see in the Second World War or First World War, or kind of economic depression. The more important thing is that this COVID-19 and the pandemic has taught us many important things. And one of the most important things which I, as an individual, has learned from this, that our priorities as individuals, as well as nation, and as well as the human mankind, had not been appropriate. The concentration of wealth in the few hands and the maximization of wealth by the corporates, by the world's biggest tycoons, created an imbalance among the human beings. And this left the majority of the people around us vulnerable to the different kinds of pandemics, epidemics, poverty, and all these things. And certainly, what we could realize from this whole dilemma was that the investment with the countries in the nation were having in the medical research is still very insufficient. The failure of the medical researchers, the genetics experts, the virologists, I would not say it a failure, but rather their very long time being taken to develop the virus, to develop the vaccines and other preventive measures, and even not having the forecast of such kind of pandemic in the world, I think gave us to this stage. There is still a big need in the world for improving the forecasting system about the medical emergencies, the research in the virology and in the preventive and precautionary measures, because I believe that the kind of disaster we had, in which so far I think more than 85,000 people have died, and almost uh, something like 1.5 or 1.4 million people are being infected, and we could see that some of the nations like United States, Italy, Spain, and even UK have the highest number of tolls because of this infection. So this certainly takes us to this thinking, and I think this should open once the COVID is over, inshallah. This should open a dialogue and a discourse that what should be the future of the mankind and what should be the future of the Mother Earth, and what should be the priorities of the nations in the coming times to avoid this kind of crisis, deeper crisis in the world again. And we have seen that the Bill Gates, the chief executive of the Microsoft, has warned about this kind of disasters and pandemics time and again. Sometime it may be manufactured, or sometime it may be natural, but in both cases, the humanity has to suffer a lot. So certainly, this takes us to this thinking that the world has to set together and to fix their responsibilities and to fix their future priorities in a very pragmatic way so that we cannot have this kind of disaster again in the human history. The lecture of today is very interesting, and the Holy Prophet said that Sayyidul Qawmu Khadimuhum, that the leader of a nation is their servant. And if we look back at the history of Islam, we could see a number of incidents where the servant was treated more honorably than the master. And you, our Muslim friends, might be remembering the famous incidents of the Islamic history, that how the master was giving the opportunity to his servant to be riding on the camel while he was tired, and the master was having the rope of camel, and the people were just surprised to see that the master is moving and the servant is resting on the back of camel. So by and large, Islam has given a lot of importance to the role of servants, and definitely the trust of the leadership and the trust of mastership, which has been bestowed on the human beings and Muslims in the Islamic society, is a very high trust. And certainly the Muslim leaders and the leaders in Islam would be more accountable than the ordinary people. And that's why when the Khalifa Rashid, the Caliph, Hazrat Umar bin Khattab said that if even a dog is dead on the bank of the Farat river, God will ask Umar ibn Khattab. And Umar ibn Khattab, the then Caliph, the then ruler, was feeling himself to be more accountable to the God and to the Allah for anything being done wrong in the society. Now, the servant leadership or public servant leadership theory basically emanated from this fact that the leaders, in fact, are not more interested to assume the leadership roles or the perks and privileges, or to be certainly celebrated by the people to become the big leaders, or to be having their very high advertisements and billboards and all this. Rather, they would be identified to be leaders in the society by virtue of their selfless devotion and commitment to the society. And we could see some of these examples, like we discussed last time the role of Mother Fa, who was a nurse basically, and she visited Pakistan, the northern areas, and she could see in Chetral and Gilgit-Baltistan, she could see a large number of people uh, who were suffering from the disease of leprosy. Even they would be people uh, untouchable by the families, by their parents even. And she then tried to help those thousands leprosy uh, patients who otherwise were not treatable. And she spent her entire life in the north, and she died. And she died like a mother of the nation, a mother of those patients who otherwise could have been dead because of this very lethal disease. Similarly, we could see the examples of people like Mother Trosha in India, who had been very committed to serve the orphans without having any greed for her own celebration in society. And in the latest history, we could see the great philanthropists of Pakistan like Abdul Sattar Eidi, a person who was an ordinary driver and who started to offer his taxi car for pick and drop of the patients to the hospitals, and then it became one of the largest philanthropy in the world, in the foundation. So now these kind of leaders and these kind of servant leaders could create a new thinking in the society and in the management theory, that whether leadership would come from the position, or the people would become leaders by serving to the leadership. And these are the people who most of the time are trying to self actualize them, and they are not interested to have any role, any position, or any designation. Now, the leadership, service leadership. If you look back at the history, Greenleaf was the first person to be credited for this theory, which was kind in the early 70s, and its more emphasis was on the behavior of the leaders. Greenleaf, the most frequently referred definition by Greenleaf in 70 is that it begins with the natural feeling that one wants to serve first. Then conscious choice brings one to aspire to lead. The difference manifests itself in the care taken by the servant first to make sure that other people's highest priority needs are being served. The best test is to do those served grow as persons. Do they, while being served, become healthier, wiser, freer, more autonomous, more likely themselves to become servants? And what is the effect of the least privilege in society? Will they benefit, or at least they will not further be deprived? So the basic genesis of this theory is that the leaders would first of all become the servant of the people being served, and make them happier, make them more prosperous in the society, and then become their leader. So it's not the desire to become leader, rather that is the desire to serve and to become servant, and by virtue of that being servant, then people may celebrate them as leaders. And two attributes given by the characteristic of the servant leaders. Now, the model which was given by Greenleaf, is having three important components, and the first is the antecedent conditions, the servant leader behaviors, and the third is the outcome. Now, the antecedent conditions, which is specific to the environment of the organization, and that might be different from different organizations, from different communities, from different society. So that will definitely have the culture, the leader attributes in that society, and the follower receptivity, and the follower's capacity to be receptive, understanding the vision and mission of the leaders. The servant leader behavior, which is very important, is we discussed this from the Spears 2002, conceptualization, emotional healing, putting followers in front first, helping followers grow and succeed, behavior ethically, empowering, creating value for the community. And once this is done, the servant leader would like to have the outcomes by the followers in terms of the performance and growth. The overall organizational performance would improve, and the societal impact of this outcome, these outcome will be great. Now we discussed these attributes of the model very detail. The cultural norms of an organization, society. We discussed this. The leader attributes again are very important. The follower receptivity of the follower is a factor that appears to influence the impact of servant leaders and outcomes such as personal and organizational job performance. For some followers, service leaders has positive impact, and for others, servant leader may not be effective. So that would depend on the society, on the attributes of the followers, whether they accept the servant leadership style or not. In some followers, this may not be treated as a positive sign, and people may not be giving you the advantage to be very servant to the followers. So definitely, this is something which is not in the control of leaders. Now, the leader behaviors, which we discussed briefly, that for example, the conceptualization through thorough understanding of the organization purpose, complexity, and mission. For example, Kat Simpson, a senior nursing supervisor in the emergency room for a large hospital, uses conceptualizing to lead her department. She fully understands the mission of the hospital and at the same time knows how to effectively to manage the staff on day-to-day basis. Our staff members say Kate has sixth sense about what's the best for the people. She is known for her wisdom in dealing with difficult patients and helping staff diagnose complex medical problems. Her abilities, competency, and value as a servant leader earned her hospital caregiver of the year award. So she was awarded for the best caregiver. The second important attribute of the servant leader is emotional healing. We discussed that they would be providing the healing, the empathy to the followers, and they would stand by them in terms of problem. Putting forward first, surely that one of the dominant characteristic of the servant leader is to put the interest of the follower at the top. They would least be bothered about their own concern and their own interest. Rather, they would be more focused on the interest and success of the followers. Helping followers grow and succeed. It's very important that the followers will not be having the capacity many times, and it is very important being a servant leader that you have to grow them in terms of their capacity and make them succeed in their uh, vision and priorities. Behaving ethically, really very important, that the role model that doing the right thing in the right way is always a challenge for the servant leaders, and they would be always expected by the followers to be doing the right thing in the right way. Empowering, this will allow the freedom and independence given to the followers in the decision making. Once they are developed and they are having enough capacity, then they will be empowered to solve the problems. And finally, creating value for the community. That servant leaders, by virtue of their collective goals and outcomes, would try to create a value for the society and for the community around. And that society and value for the society would definitely be creating high regard for the servant. Now, when we look at the outcomes in the servant leadership, we discussed that there will be performance and growth improvement in the followers, organizational performance will be improved, and the societal impact will be there. So most of the servant leaders' behavior focus directly on recognizing followers' contribution and helping them realize their human potentials. Organizational performance, the servant leadership has an influence on organizational performance. Servant leaders also affect the way organizational teams function. Servant leaders contribute positively to team potency by enhancing group processes and clarity. And finally, the societal impact. The servant leadership will have positive impact on society. This we discussed that this is one of the biggest attribute and identity of the servant leaders, that their contributions, their hard work would always contribute to the development of society. For example, Mother Teresa, who were working for years and years for the hungry, homeless, and unwanted orphans, result in the creation of a new religion order, the missionary of charity. Mother Teresa's servant leadership has had an extraordinary impact for the society throughout the world. And if we look at Pakistan, we could see the contribution of Abdul Sattar Edi, who created the more than 100 different kinds of projects, and some of these projects were for those who are not owned children who are thrown away, uh, and he provided, and his wife Bilqis Aidi provided the honorable living for this kind of kids, and similarly the people who could not afford to be uh, created a lot of orphanages for them, and so on. So I think the servant leaders of the level of Mother Teresa are Dr. Fa or Abdul Sattar Edi were beyond their personal objectives, beyond their personal gains. They were more and more focused on the societal impact of their great works. Now, how does this work? Uh, this is again subject to a lot of concerns. Put followers first. So, the first and the most important attribute of this leadership theory is that the followers would be first for the first time and every time. That they would be the top priority of the servant leaders would be the followers. Secondly, it is concerned with how leaders treat followers and the outcomes they are likely to emerge. So, the followers, through different behaviors and then the outcomes they would like to see the servant leaders. Servant leaders make it priority to listen to their followers. So, we discussed that the listening is one of the biggest attribute of the servant leaders. Servant leadership works best when leaders are altruistic. Yes, we discussed that they are the people who will always sacrifice their personal gain, their personal comfort for the comfort of the others of the followers. So they have a deep-seated interest and strong motivation to serve others. Rather than using their power to dominate others, leaders should make every attempt to share their power and enable others to grow and become autonomous. This again is very important that they are not power hungry. They would try to deploy their powers and delegate their powers to their followers and developing them, and they would not be coming to lead from the front, but they would prefer them to lead from the back, in the sense that they would put them in the leadership role and they will empower them so that their followers can do great things. Organizations that adopt servant leadership culture are committed to help those in need who operate outside of the organization. So most of the time the servant leadership can be seen in the philanthropy most of the time, and the society, the non-governmental organizations are the charity works where we, the people who are working for a greater cause, are least interested in the personal development of projections. Now we have a couple of strengths that it makes a new concept of altruism, that leadership would not start from assuming a role or assuming a designation, rather it would start from serving the people, and that's where the isar and mawakhat, the concept of isar and mawakhat, which is adopted by the different like a Khud Foundation in Pakistan of Dr. Saqib. Basically, that is based on altruism or Mawakhat in Medina. Basically, is basically the altruism of Medina, in which the concept in which the Ansar and uh, the people who were in Medina, the way they help the people who have migrated from Mecca with the Prophet, Holy Prophet, peace be upon him, and that created a mawakhat, the concept of altruism in Islamic history. So, in this particular servant leadership, which is more close to the Islamic concept of leadership, the altruism is basically the central point. The second is that it provides a counterintuitive and proactive approach to use the influence or power in leadership. It argues that leadership should not dominate, direct, or control, but rather leaders should share control and influence. So, this is again very close to Islamic thoughts and history, that leaders would prefer to give their powers, part of their powers and dominance and influence to the followers. And followers' readiness to receive servant leadership moderates the potential usefulness of leading from this approach. Once the servant leaders have this attribute and this approach to delegate, to influence, to motivate, then definitely the followers will moderate the usefulness. And fourth, that the servant leadership question at SLQ, which was developed by Leiden and Wine in 2008, has been used in a very sound way for the measurement of leadership in the different organizations. Now, we have a couple of criticisms. For example, it's a paradoxical nature of the title servant leadership creates semantic noise that diminishes the potential value of the approach. It implies following and following is viewed as opposite of leading. So once we use the term servant leader, then definitely even the term itself is contradicting because the servant cannot be leader, and that is where it is contradicting the rest of the knowledge and body of knowledge leadership. But this is one of the criticism. Second, there is a debate among servant leadership scholars regarding the core dimension of process. To date, researchers have been unable to reach consensus or common definitions or theoretical framework for servant leaders. And this is just like the traitist theory that we couldn't had a consensus on the traits which can be connected to the real outcomes and the real leadership. And this would continue definitely. And that's why we say that in Quran, the leadership or the attributes have been established by the divine wisdom and divine revelations of wahi by the Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's why the decision of right and good can not be based on only the theories, but rather it is the divine wisdom and it is the divine revelations of wahi which would establish the basic attributes of good people. Third, a large segment of the writing on servant leadership has a perspective or tone that implies that good leaders put others first. This certainly compromises on the authority in directing by the leaders. Yes, this is sometimes counterproductive that if you give all the powers to the followers and you believe that they would be doing, but this would, by the end of the day, diminish the role of leaders. And by the end of the day, leaders may not be productive and they may not be even admitted by the followers as leaders. So this is really very challenging in sometimes. Finally, it's unclear why conceptualizing is included as one of the servant leader behavior in model of servant leadership. Is it cognitive or behavior? So this is another debate that whether the conceptualization, which involves the visionary leaders, which involves to do the things in right way, and again understanding the things in a better way. That is both cognitive and behavior, which is psychomotor, or maybe affective domain. So the question whether conceptualization, whether a person should be intelligent or it should be also having emotional intelligence, both are important, and to what extent. So this is one of the questions. But still it can be used very widely in the real world. For example, the servant leadership has been extensively used in a variety of organizations for more than 30 years in trainings and development. Many organizations in Fortune 500 such as Starbucks, AT&T, Southwest Airlines, Vanguard groups employ ideas from servant leadership. Servant leaders have started many colleges and universities around the world. Its focus of numerous independent coaches, trainers, and consultants. So, the servant leadership is still used by the different kinds of supporters, developers. Overall, the most recognized and comprehensive center for training in servant leadership is Greenleaf Center for Servant Leadership, and that's given on www.greenleaf.org. So it's a resource which the viewer can visit to see that how can they get the benefit from the servant leadership. In summary, servant leadership provides a philosophy and set of behaviors that individual in the organization setting can learn and develop. So you can develop some of the very basic attributes and behaviors from this theory. As usual, this is Mr. Noble is basically a case study, and I would request the readers to go through the case study and answer the questions. And you could see in the last that there are 7 kinds of attributes, and these are basically the behaviors of the servant leaders we discuss. And this scaling would definitely tell you the attribute and the level of attribute you have in that particular group. These are review questions. I would leave it to the readers. These are some of the papers some of the links for going to this YouTube, and you can download some of the discussion and discourse on the servant leaders. These are some of the research articles. For example, this was antecedent of servant leadership, mixed method study by Debek. And this is a mixed method study explored the antecedents of servant leadership. The sequential explanatory research design consists of two distinct phases, quantitative followed by qualitative. The phase one quantitative survey collected from 499 leaders from community leadership programs and 630 rated using the servant leadership questionnaire during phase two. In the first phase. In phase two, 12 selected leaders from phase one were interviewed to explain the phase one results in more depth. Four key findings emerged from the data. The longer a leader is in leadership role, the more frequent the servant leader behavior. So, interesting that as you go more in the leadership role, with the time, your motivation, your influence, your passion as a servant leader would definitely, uh, develop. And for that, you need to be in this position. If I just give my example, my life, I think this should be at least for 20 to 30 years, at least for 2 to 3 decades. The second is leaders who volunteer at least 1 hour per week demonstrate higher servant leader behavior. So the people who have the attributes of servant leaders, and they demonstrate some philanthropy during their week, then definitely they would have more attributes towards servant leaders. Thirdly, servant leaders influence others through building trust. Trusting relationship is the base for this servant leadership. And finally, servant leaders demonstrate an altruistic mindset. We discussed this, that this is one of the fundamental attribute of the servant leaders, that they would be highly altruist. هل جزاء الإحسان إلا الإحسان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان. So the return of benefits is only and only benefits from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the servant leader would demonstrate and believe that whatever they sacrifice to their servants to please the Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and to please the Almighty Allah and God, they he will be getting manifold returns here and hereafter. This is another very interesting paper in which the emotional intelligence is an antecedent of the servant leadership, and I'll not read it out, but that if I'll go to our finding based on assessment of 75 civic leaders and 401 of their followers suggest that emotional intelligence is a good predictor of a leader-servant leader ideology or approach towards leadership, but may not be good predictor of servant leadership behavior is rated by the leader's followers. So this is one of the findings of this paper. Another very interesting paper, one of the very basic developer or proponent of this theory, Darren Nock, Dirk van der Nock, the Ramses University, France, I think, and servant leadership review and synthesis. I mean, this since he was one of the proponent of this theory, so servant leadership is demonstrated by empowering and developing people by expressing humility, authenticity, interpersonal acceptance, and stewardship, and by providing direction. A high quality, dyadic relationship, trust, and fairness are expected to be the most important mediating process to encourage self actualization, positive job attitudes, performance, and stronger organizational focus on sustainability and corporate social responsibility. Very interesting and important. This is another comparative analysis. I will not go to it, but this is certainly between the industry in Ghana, a third world country, least developed country, and in USA, and they did the comparison.